Right, thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, and my name is Lisa Minato. I'm the current Acting General Manager of Upper Macquarie County Council. The time is now 2:35 on the 11th of February 2022. Welcome to the very first Upper Macquarie County Council meeting for the election, following the election of members. And I'll be sharing the first part of this meeting until we have a chairperson in place. We have a full agenda for today, so without further ado, I think we should crack on. Firstly, we'll start with the acknowledgement of country. It is the traditional custodians of the lands where we work and live. Council celebrates the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of the New South Wales Central Tablelands. This meeting is recorded. Members and the public are advised that the proceedings of this meeting, other than any confidential matters, will be recorded and made publicly available on the council website, and persons attending the meeting should refrain from making any defamatory statements. As I mentioned before, please be aware that the speaker, this new speaker and microphone, is sitting in the centre of the table. So please try and avoid tapping the desk or leaving any vibrating phones near the device. We shall now move to the oaths and or affirmations of members as per the agenda in the witness paper. You'll find in front of you, in your green folders that you've been given, are both the oath and the affirmation. If you could choose which one you'd like to state, and I'll go round the room randomly. We're going to start from our left here, number one. And if you could each give either your oath or your affirmation. And the affirmation or oath will be minuted, and that will be our recording. You'd like to go ahead?
Thanks, Roger. I, Bruce Watt, swear that I will undertake the duties of the office of councillor in the best interest of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area and the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member Watt.
Thank you.
Member Leslie, if you'd like to give yours.
I, Stephen Leslie, solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will undertake the office of councillor in the best interest of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area, the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member Leslie. Member Fry.
I, Ben Fry, swear that I will undertake the duties of the office of councillor in the best interests of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area and the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member Fry. Member O'Connor.
Colin O'Connor, swear that I will undertake the duties and office of councillor in the best interest of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area and the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member O'Connor. Member Reynolds.
Affirmation. I, Bruce Reynolds, solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will undertake the duties of the office of councillor in the best interests of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area and the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act of 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member Reynolds. Member Ewan.
Yeah, chose to read the oath. I, Alan Ewan, swear I will undertake the duties of the office of councillor in the best interest of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area, and that the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member McGibbon.
Thank you, Acting Chair. I, Andrew McKibben, solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that I will undertake the duties of the office of councillor in the best interests of the people of the Upper Macquarie County Council area and the Upper Macquarie County Council, and that I will faithfully and impartially carry out the functions, powers, authorities and discretions vested in me under the Local Government Act 1993 or any other act to the best of my ability and judgment.
Thank you, Member McGibbon. I've just realised that in my haste to move forward that I did miss apologies. I'm terribly sorry about that. Although there have been no apologies of non-attendance handed in to me, we should note, however, that we have received a resignation of a member delegate from Bathurst Council, being Councillor North. So we are down to 7 at the moment. I do believe that elections will be held soon in the next Bathurst Council meeting for another member that is on its way. Noting that. So now we're going to move forward. Everybody's okay with that? Now we're going to move forward into the chairperson and deputy chairperson election. We have a recommendation there. Could I get a mover and a seconder, please? Member Fry?
I'll second that.
Member Leslie, thank you.
May I move an amendment?
Yes.
Chair, I'd just like to, for clarity, and I know it's in the Act, but after number 3, number 4, note that the term of the chairperson and deputy chairperson shall be for 2 years as required under the Act to conclude in February 2024, and move number 4 to number 5.
Yes.
I've got a seconder.
Yes. Or can we have the mover and the seconder agree to that
Amendment, yes.
amendment? So Member Fry and Member Leslie.
Yeah,
See no issue, yeah.
I see no issue. It is the law. It would have happened anyway, but it's fine if it's clarified. It's fine.
So we'll make that amendment to the recommendations. All for, against, carried. Now we shall move to the election of chairperson. At the moment, I have only received 1 nomination. Are there any other nominations for chairperson? No? If there are no further nominations and there is only 1 nomination that I have received, this nomination form has been received and has been completed correctly. It has been signed by 2, one of whom is the nominee and has been agreed to, consented to. Now that we do not have to vote in or decide which way to vote, because there is no vote, I can now declare that Member Andrew McGibbon is now the chairperson, as he is the only nominee.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your support, and I hope I can uphold the position of chairman and that we can proceed ahead in the terms of reference of what our organisation has to ameliorate the impact of weeds in our 4 constituent council areas. Thank you very much for your confidence.
Thank you, Member McGibbon. Now we should move forward to the election of the deputy chairperson. I should also state clearly that as I am the acting general manager, I am the returning officer for both the election of chairperson and deputy chairperson. So moving forward on the election of deputy chairperson, are there any other nominations for deputy chairperson? No, I have received only 1, and therefore we do not have to nominate a way in which to vote, as we've only received 1. The nomination has been received. It has been signed off by 2, including that 2 is including the nominee himself, and has been consented to. The nominee is Councillor Member Bruce Reynolds, and as he is the only nominee, I can now declare him the deputy chairperson.
So I look forward to working with Member McKibben, but also all the other members to get some positive outcomes during this next 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so now I believe now that we have a chairperson, he can now take the role of chairman. And would you like to come up and take your seat?
Thank you.
Then
Next issue on the agenda is questions from the public. I don't believe there are any questions from the public. Madam Acting General Manager.
No, there's no.
Next issue is confirmation of minutes of the ordinary meeting of the Upper County Council held on the 5th of November 2021. I'd ask for a mover and seconder, and probably those who were actually in attendance.
I was here, I'll move that.
Yes, thank you, and Mr. Reynolds. So move, Councillor, Delegate, what is it, Member Leslie, and seconded Member Reynolds. Any questions arising out of the minutes? I move that the minutes be accepted. All those in favour?
Aye.
Disclosures of interest, yes. Are there any disclosures of interest? Can I have a mover for the disclosure of interest? Sorry, I'm just getting.
Yeah.
Council, could I have a mover and a seconder for any disclosures of interest, please? Thank you, Mr. Councillor, Member Fry and Member Watt. Recommendation that council, are there any disclosures of interest?
Yeah, I should disclose that I'm a landholder, but I'm also an employee of Local Land Services. I don't believe there's a conflict of interest, but I want to make you aware of that.
Thank you. I think that'll probably be disclosed in pecuniary, well, what is it, the disclosure, when you complete the disclosure.
Yes,
statements, that'll be disclosed, but I don't see any conflict of interest unless something arises with LLS, between LLS and UMCC.
Yep.
So noting that potential disclosure of interest, are there any others? Sorry.
Well, I guess, yeah, Member Allen, you and I guess likewise, I'm a landholder in one of the council's obviously areas. And there again, I can't see that is a continuing interest that probably needs to go further than that, but we can acknowledge that.
I think there would be a number of people in that particular interest. I think all of us would have some property interest,
Yes.
whether it's small or large, within the
Yes, that's right.
Upper Macquarie County Council area. I think we will be disclosing that in our pecuniary interest returns, and that should be sufficient. The only issues that would could arise if you're subject to a notice or something in the future which may preclude you from voting on that, on a prosecution or something similar. That's how I understand it. So I think we will be all noting our pecuniary interest, but at this time I don't think there's anything that preclude you having a significant or insignificant pecuniary interest in handling anything that's subject to this meeting.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Got all those in favour of the recommendation that council note any disclosures of interest made? Passed unanimously. Thank you. Presentations. I understand that there will be three presentations, sorry. One from Leanne Smith, the Director of Intendus. Do we want to deal with these individually and go through them one by one, or do we resolve initially that they all be done and we just follow one after the other?
Maybe resolve there.
All right, so we have three presentations, one from Leanne Smith, the Director of Intendus, who conducts the Council's external financial audit, or did so for 20 and 21. And she will share with Council how the Council is tracking from an audit perspective. Second presentation is from Rita Sykes, the Regional Weeds Coordinator, Central Plains LLS. And she will be dealing with
me?
Council works closely with LLS.
I can't hear you.
Pretty Act 2015. And the third will be from the Acting General Manager, Lisa Minato, providing a quick overview of Council's compliance policy and the general operating information. So maybe at this stage, do we have to move? So maybe if I could ask Leanne, I know you're online, if you could please provide your presentation on the audit, financial audit for 2020-21, and do you want to accept questions throughout the presentation or at the end, Leanne?
Yep, I'm happy to have them as we go along. That's fine.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. We look forward to it.
Right, do you just want me to share my screen, Lisa? Is
Yeah,
that the easiest?
if it's possible, or I can bring up your presentation as well. Is it working for you?
You got that? Okay, are you running it, Lisa?
I think so.
Yep, no, that's okay, that's fine, just so I know. All right. So Lisa asked me just to give a brief, I guess because we've got some new members on the council, and also just probably a bit of an update and a rebrief of what we looked at with the 30 June 2021 financials, but also just a little bit of background in relation to the audit and the audit process and the financial statements. So if you can go to the next one, Lisa, if you're running the, yep, beautiful. Okay, so in terms of council's financial reporting, so it's primarily governed by the Local Government Act and the regulations, and also the Local Government Code of Accounting Practice and Financial Reports. And also on top of that is the Australian Accounting Standards. So the code is updated generally on an annual basis for changes in local government environment, but also any changes in the Australian accounting standards. So AASBs don't change too frequently, thank goodness, but the code will change a little bit. And there's been a lot of refining of the code over the last couple of years, which has been really good to see. Council's auditor is actually the Audit Office of New South Wales. So our firm acts as an audit service provider for the Audit Office for a number of councils, including Upper Macquarie. But the Audit Office does also conduct some external audits of local government and other entities directly themselves. So they'll actually have their own staff go out and do the work. Okay, next. So this is just probably a bit of a background. Why do we do financial statements? The whole idea behind that is to provide information about the entity that is useful to, talks about the accounting standard talks about existing and potential investors, lenders and other creditors, etc. It also then goes on to talk about not-for-profits specifically, which is obviously what local government is. And it talks about resource providers, recipients of your goods and services, and also anybody who's performing an oversight function. So in the case of local government, that's the state government, and also the Office of Local Government as the intermediary there. Okay. So our primary financial statements that are in are presented in the financials, and the rest of the information is basically there to support, is a statement of financial position, which a lot of people would know by the term a balance sheet. So it's got your assets and liabilities and equity on it. The income statement or profit and loss, so that's income and expenditure, and it's prepared on an accruals basis. We have a statement of changes in equity as well, which reconciles the retained earnings or accumulated equity of the organisation, which in the case of Upper Macquarie is primarily accumulated retained earnings. General purpose councils will tend to have asset revaluation reserves in that equity section as well. And then a statement of cash flows. So the income statement is prepared on what we call an accruals basis. So it's saying, doesn't matter when you paid something or you were paid for something, was it owed to you or did you owe it at 30 June? The cash flow is exactly that. It's purely about when did you actually physically make the payment or receive the money. Upper Macquarie gets 2 audit reports. Now you're right, Lisa, 2 audit reports. So one is the standard general purpose audit report, and then the second one is the long form audit report, which is technically is called the report on the conduct of the audit. A general purpose council, so your Bathurst, Oberon, Lithgow, Blaney, will also get a special purpose financial statement with an audit report on it, which is typically on your water and sewer business units. Then there's also audits performed by us on behalf of the audit office for the pension rebate claim and also permissible income, which is your rate pegging. All councils also get issued with a management letter at the completion of the audit. So this looks at any matters of governance interests that have been identified, any unresolved matters that have been carried forward from previous year's audits, and any matters which require communication to those charged with governance under the Australian auditing standards. Generally, it's going to be about matters around improving governance or policies and procedures, or if we do find some breakdown in internal controls that we believe needs to be addressed. Okay. Just a couple of basics in relation to the financials. I don't want to go into too much detail. The balance sheet is split between assets and liabilities, but they're then further split between current and non-current. Generally speaking, current is anything which is going to need to be paid or will be received or used within 12 months. And a non-current is anything that isn't going to crystallise until after the end of the first 12-month period. And as I mentioned, accrual accounting, which is what the accounts are prepared on, apart from the cash flow statement, is about recognising items as council becomes legally entitled to them or has a legal obligation in relation to them, regardless of when the actual cash payment or the cash was transferred. Okay, something that's a little bit unique to local government is what we call external and internal restrictions. I did note that what has previously been termed internal restrictions are actually being called internal allocations from 2022 onwards, which is possibly a better wording anyway. So external restrictions are instances where council has had restrictions placed on money, generally money they've received, and need to basically quarantine those funds. So the best example of that is if you get grant funding that is for a specific project, you can't go out and spend it on something else. So if you haven't spent all that money, then it needs to be externally restricted at the end of the year. So it's effectively quarantined for the purpose it was given to you. Internal restrictions or internal allocations are those that have been allocated by council resolution or policy. So that's looking at, I guess, tucking some funds away in a methodical manner for future programs or projects that council has planned. And Upper Macquarie has done a fair amount of work in the last couple of years in getting some structure around the way in which those internal restrictions or internal allocations are determined and calculated. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail on this one, but probably just something to flag is that grants and contributions can be accounted for differently depending on what they're provided for and also the terms and conditions attached to the funding. So some grants and contributions, council will recognise the revenue when it gets the money. So the cash physically turns up in the bank account. Others, councils will need to recognise, will only be able to recognise the revenue as they expend the funds for the purposes for which they were given. So effectively, it's kind of matching the revenue and expenditure. That's something that needs to be assessed on a grant by grant basis and is generally done at the end of the financial year. The nice thing with Upper Macquarie is there's not too much of that that we need to worry about too much, but we have had instances where there's been grants that needed to be matched off against the expenditure as it occurs rather than receipted directly into income. Okay, any questions on any of that sort of bits and pieces to start with? No? Brilliant. Okay. So for those of you that were here for the presentation last year, this is basically, I guess, a bit of a refresh of that one. So this is just looking at the consolidated operating result of council for the last couple of years. So before capital, the result last year was 137, and after capital, it was also 137. Upper Macquarie doesn't tend to receive too many capital grants and contributions. There were a few received back in 2018, which I think from memory were to do with the drones, Lisa, I think that's right. Yeah. So it's not something that you would typically see at Upper Macquarie, but it does happen from time to time. Okay. So revenue and expenditure. So the total revenue at the end of last year was $1.7 million and total expenditure was 1.5. You can see that revenue figure and also the expenditure figure tends to bob around a little bit from year to year. It certainly has the last couple of years, and we'll have a bit more of a look at that when we get into the next few slides. Okay. I guess before we get into the revenue and expenditure, I guess one of the big issues for Upper Macquarie is its reliance on the contributions that are made by its constituent councils to its operations. And they're basically, I guess, they're relied on effectively to keep the doors open. So if there wasn't anything else coming in terms of grant funding or other revenue, what this is, I guess, looking at the gap between what that baseline expenditure is that is needed to keep the doors open versus where those constituent council contributions are sitting. That gap has closed down a little over the last couple of years, but as you can see, even last year, it was still about $200,000 difference. So that's just something to keep an eye on. And it's something with Upper Macquarie that's probably a little bit different to a general purpose council, is having that reliance on what's coming in from the constituent councils.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure can.
Is that reduction a good thing or a bad thing?
The reduction in that gap,
Yeah.
it's a good thing for Upper Macquarie. It's probably another matter for the constituent councils. You know, the thing is, if there's sufficient funds to keep the doors open, that then gives council a bit more flexibility in terms of what other revenue sources it might be going out and seeking, or programs it might be undertaking that it would not be doing if it didn't have that backing.
Thank you.
Yep.
May I add something, Mr. Chair, to the new councillors? One of the reasons why there is a closing of the gap was that councils are now paying for roadside control, whereas the county council was funding roadside control out of its general revenue previously, out of the council revenue. So that's why there's been an increase or a decrease in that gap. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Member Watt, yes.
I presume it'll be covered, but can you cover the contributions of each council and how that's calculated?
It is an interesting formula. We may not have time to explain it completely, but there are two separate sections, and the acting general manager will correct me. But there's a section that councils put in that was a formula developed some time ago, but 3 years ago, we went out to constituent councils to say we're not getting on top of the roadsides. We actually need more funding, and so they've contributed more towards the road funding. Except I think Lithgow may have reduced their road contribution to help us get on top of the roads a bit better, because we were falling behind and we weren't looking financially strong as we continued to do the road funding at the rate we were, using basically what the funding the constituent councils have provided us already. So there are two parts. There's that, and there's a separate road funding section. which constituent councils give us.
Mr. Chairman, I suggested the first workshop that we actually.
We can go through it. It is an interesting, yeah, the formula is, it was developed some time ago and agreed between the councils. I think it was agreed sometime between 2013 and 17 or something in that period, that term. Yeah, and a government agency went and did an independent review as to what each council would be. Sorry, if that answers the question, probably because I'm not sure if Leanne is aware of the formula herself.
I know there is a formula, but I would agree. I would suggest it's probably a more detailed discussion than what you probably want to get into today at the meeting.
So there's two, as I said, there's two components.
Yeah.
What came out under that formula, we went back in the last term to ask constituent council for more money to do the roads. That was accepted by all, though Lithgow came back, I think, and reduced their amount that they wanted to spend on the roads. So that's where we are. Thank you. All right, thanks. Sorry, Leanne.
You're right. Okay. So apart from the constituent council contributions, council also receives funding under the weeds. What's it, the WAP, and that's the number that's mostly in that grants and contributions operating figure, or the bulk of it. The user charges and fees figure, as you can see, it moves around quite significantly and has done the last couple of years. It moves around quite significantly from year to year. So I'm assuming everyone's across the aerial spraying program and what it is. I guess the reason that bobs around is because there are particularly weather and ground conditions that need to be taken into account to enable that program to go ahead from year to year. As you can see, I think 2017 and 2021 were the only years where 2 full programs have been run in the last few years. Then we've had other years where there was only 1 program run. There was a year where there was 1 and a bit. So that's really bobbed around with primarily with prevailing weather and environmental conditions around that. So when it's not run, it makes a really big, whether it's run or not, makes a really big difference in the results of Upper Macquarie County Council, or has done historically. And similarly, you can see that materials expense item, which last year was sitting up at 870. That effectively is mirroring what happens in the aerial spraying income, because obviously if you're going to do an aerial spraying program, you've got to have materials, and that also includes services. So the contractor who does the aerial spraying, their costs are also included in there. So that again will move up and down depending on whether the program is run or not. Cash and investments is, I'm always really pleased to see this, particularly the last few years. Back in 2017, council had limited funds, and there's really been a concerted effort without compromising service, I'd have to say, but really been a concerted effort to improve that cash figure. The big thing with the cash figure is that if you don't have the money in the bank and an opportunity comes up, you may not have the funds available, the ready funds available to undertake that opportunity. Particularly, I mean, not so, it's slowed down a bit now, but you know, a lot of grant opportunities, the funding wasn't available till after council had completed works, and this is just generally speaking. So if there's no resources available to say, yes, we can do that, or we can do a co-contribution to that program or something like that, the lack of cash can really impact on council's ability to be flexible and to take on board opportunities. So it has been really pleasing to see that figure coming up over the last few years. That big dip in 2016, 2017, just if anybody's interested, that was primarily off the back of a number of long-serving staff including one of the former general managers leaving, and there were some significant leave liabilities that needed to be paid out in that period. So that's what contributed to that at that time.
So Leanne, can I ask, what do you think an ideal reserve for this organisation is? Or a minimum reserve?
No. Look, it's not really about minimums or maximums. But I would say, you know, if you're starting to get close to that $1.5 million mark, that's probably not a bad place to be. And it also gives you some capacity to wear those bumps in the aerial spraying program from year to year as well. Yeah, I mean, and the risk is you don't want to get it too high either, because you know, it's not a matter of keeping all the money here, because then you're not going out and doing what you need to be doing with those funds. And there's got to be a balance between service delivery but also having that buffer. So I think it's getting to, it's pretty much at the point where I think it's probably not a bad spot, yeah, to find equilibrium.
The reason for my question is, if we were to look at a couple of expenditure items in this meeting or the next meeting, we obviously want to ensure we maintain adequate reserves. Hence, if we were to reduce to, what are we at now, 1.327, and I'm not sure what the figure is currently in the QBRs, I can't remember. About the same. So
Yep.
if we reduce, so if, for instance, we were to reduce to 1.1, that would still be acceptable?
Yep. And look, a lot of it as well, it doesn't just depend on the fact that you're spending money. It probably depends on what you're spending the money on as well.
Yes.
So if it's something strategic or something that's going to help you with from an operational perspective in the future, or something that's needed, you know, for various reasons, then definitely, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
A question to you, Leanne. With regard to our internal restrictions, I know it was a couple of slides ago, but do you think we've now provisioned enough in our internal restrictions to cover expenditure? And we've got about 300,000 in unrestricted cash. But do you think we've provisioned enough with our internal restrictions now to cover the organisation and have enough funds to run for approximately 12 months, which I think is $400,000 in business continuity or something like that?
Let me just have a look. Sorry. Yeah, so council actually had 800,000 in internal restrictions at the end of last year. And 400 was in the business viability fund, and the balance was in employee leave entitlements and plant replacement and infrastructure replacement. So yeah, that's certainly sitting at what I would think would be an adequate level for Upper Macquarie. Yeah.
Thank you.
I certainly don't think you need to put any more aside into internal restrictions. That's it there. So that's one of the things, you know, one of the things that that there has been a lot of work done over the last couple of years is putting some structure and methodology around the calculation of those internal restrictions, and that's just as important as what the number is, because what we don't want to see is restrictions just being changed willy-nilly because, well, not for very good reasons, and not being consistent from year to year. So it's really important to try and get that consistency into the arrangements. Okay, righto. So the Code of Accounting Practice has in it some performance indicators, which are very, very much local government specific, and tend to get certainly historically have tended to receive a fair amount of attention at the expense of pretty much everything else in the financial statements. They are good little indicators, but I think the one thing that is always important with ratios or indicators like this is that you have an understanding of how they're calculated, because without that understanding of how they're calculated or what they're trying to achieve, they can be misinterpreted. So the first one is the operating performance ratio. So it's looking at how well council is containing its operating expenditure within its operating revenue. Now, the benchmark for that is 0. So that's basically saying the OLG doesn't want you spending any more money on operating expenditure than what you're receiving for operating revenue. So a break-even point. It's been improving over the last couple of years. One of the things as well with Upper Macquarie, just to remember, is that because it's such a small, so you can see it went from 7 to 3.4 to 7.9 the last couple of years. One of the big things with Upper Macquarie that you need to bear in mind is that a small dollar value figure will actually can actually make a big percentage change. So while the percentage movements look really big, for Upper Macquarie, that can often only be a small dollar figure movement. So that's just something to keep in mind. That said, you know, since 2016, when it was in a significant negative position, council's ratio has continued to be in a positive position. So that's really pleasing to see.
Could I ask a question there, Mr. Chair, with regard to the ratio? If we did have, because we've been building up reserves for the last few years, or profit, if we did have a negative ratio for a year, do you write a bad report, or what actually happens? Or does the government come down?
What will happen is the ratios are mentioned in the long form or the report on the conduct of audit. And if there's a reason as to why it's gone into negative, there'll often be an attempt to explain that in the audit report. It's not a case of you got a negative figure, so you got a big red cross, because there are things that can be outside of council's control that can impact on these ratios. So like it's not so much, not at all for Upper Macquarie, but those of you involved with general purpose councils, when we had the backwards and forwards between whether the FAG was in the financial assistance grant was in advance, or it was in arrears, or it moved around, that was messing up council's ratios from year to year. But so some councils had what appeared to be negative, were negative ratios when they were calculated at 30 June, but that was because the state and federal government had changed timing of grant payments. So that sort of thing is always taken into account in making an assessment, that there can be things like that that are outside of council's sphere of influence that can impact these ratios. Yeah. And there's always, if Upper Macquarie had a negative ratio in 2022, there would be some discussions trying to work out what might have caused that to happen, rather than just, oh, you're in trouble. So that's certainly not the intention. Okay, so, and this one is in a negative, or below the benchmark. It's not in a negative position, but it's below the benchmark, but for a very good reason. So this is the own source operating revenue ratio. So this is basically looking at the ratio of council's own source revenue, which for a general purpose council is user charges and fees, rates income, stuff like that, as a percentage of total revenue. So because Upper Macquarie has such a heavy reliance on particularly the constituent council contributions and the weeds funding, it is typically below this benchmark, and that's accepted. That's something we see in single purpose councils. It's quite common because they are heavily reliant on grant and contribution funding, and they don't have a rate base. So, and again, this one bobs around. So you can see it was down in 2018, back up, and it does move around as well, depending on that aerial spraying program. So the ratios improved in 2021 because you're able to do 2 aerial spraying programs that year. So this is, a great example of, you haven't met the benchmark, but there's reasons why the benchmark hasn't been met. And remember, these ratios are for every local government entity across New South Wales. They're a one size fits all, and they don't always work. Unrestricted current ratio. So what that's looking at is how much money, and this is probably touching back on this cash question that we had earlier about how much cash. So this is looking at how much unrestricted current assets does council have to cover its current liabilities. And when we talk about unrestricted, we're talking about excluding only externally restricted funds. Internal restrictions are included in this calculation. So it's, as you can see, it's actually been coming down. And to be honest, I would say 10 is too high. Getting down towards the 5, the 4, even a 3, if you really need to, is probably that 4. I would be very comfortable with that, because again, if it's up around that 10, that's suggesting that council has all these assets that it's not doing anything with, that are just sitting there and aren't being deployed to do what council is supposed to do with them. So the ratio for this is higher than 1.5, I think, from memory. Sorry, I've got a line there, but I don't have a number. I think it's certainly over 1. This is not necessarily a case of bigger is better with this ratio, because too high suggests that council isn't doing its job. And then this is the last one that's applicable to Upper Macquarie. So this is a cash expense cover ratio. So this is saying, based on the amount of cash and investments that council has at the end of the financial year, and based on what an average monthly expenditure looks like, how many months of cash do you have to cover your expenditure if no cash came in the door? So Upper Macquarie is sitting up at around 10 and has done for the last couple of years. The benchmark's 3 months, but certainly that 10 again is a position that gives you a bit of a buffer in terms of responding to opportunities. So.
And what's the yellow line in that one, Leanne?
Sorry?
The yellow line looked at 1, not 3 there.
Oh, that's in the wrong spot. Yes, that's right. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I've obviously resized it and put it in the wrong spot. Yeah, but it should be up, and you can't see where I'm pointing, but it should be up between the 2 and the 4. Yes, my apologies. Yeah. They're the only ratios or indicators that are applicable to Upper Macquarie. There are a couple of other ratios that you would see in a set of general purpose council financials. One is a debt service cover ratio, which is looking at council's capacity to repay its debt, so its principal and interest obligations out of its cash. Will only have a number in it if council has borrowings, and Upper Macquarie doesn't have any borrowings, so that's why there's no number there. And also, obviously, rates and annual charges outstanding is also a typical indicator that does get a bit of attention, because it's looking at how well council is collecting its rates and annual charges. But again, obviously not applicable to Upper Macquarie at all. Okay, so in terms of last year, we had unqualified audit reports were issued by the Audit Office. Council met all of its reporting and disclosure obligations, and has done for a number of years. So that's been really pleasing. Last year, Upper Macquarie was the first council in New South Wales to lodge with the OLG. That was on the 13th of August, and the previous year it was lodged around the 11th of August. I think the next council that lodged after the 13th of August this year was somewhere towards the end of September. So while Upper Macquarie isn't as complex as the general purpose councils, It's really nice for us and the audit office, but it's also really good for Lisa and formerly David to have that financial reporting process over and done with, bedded down, and they can keep going with their day-to-day procedures. Certainly a lot of work goes into getting the accounts done as early as possible so that it's less disruptive and it's not sort of dragging on towards the end of October. As I mentioned up the front, there's also a management letter issued after the end of each audit. The only matter that was raised in 2021 as a new matter was in relation to staff balances. There were some excessive staff balances at the end of the year. Again, as with many things, that comes back to the workload and the aerial spraying program. With the limited staffing levels that council has, it's obviously very difficult to have people out of action and on leave or extended leave for any length of time. So that's there, and that is being addressed. The previous years, there's been some matters raised around policies and procedures, IT, things like that. A couple of them were carried forward into this financial year's management letter. But again, the really pleasing thing is that a lot of the things that have been raised over the last couple of years, the former General Manager, David, and Lisa spent a lot of time getting those matters addressed and getting policies and procedures and documentation improved. So it's been really pleasing to see those matters dropping off the management letter. So that's been really great.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes,
of the acting general manager with regard to staff leave? Have we started to reduce or bring that back down to a satisfactory level?
We've begun.
Okay. Well, that's all from me, but if anybody's got any questions or any queries around anything in the accounts or the presentation, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, via Lisa, we're always available during the year. So if you've got a query or something on the financials that comes to you later on, just let Lisa know and she can get in touch with us and we can clarify if it's needed.
Are there any questions that haven't been raised already? Well, Leanne, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very thorough as normal. And I think, yes, as you said, if members have any questions, obviously they can raise them with you through Lisa, and you can come back to them. Someone may think of some after the meeting when they're going through the papers again. Thanks very much for your presentation.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Right.
She's going to pop up on the screen.
Hello.
We can't quite see you yet.
No, I'm just trying to, I've got my camera's supposed to be on.
Can you see us?
Yeah, I can see you guys. Oh, it must be which camera it's set on. Hang on. Try that one.
Permission to share your
There goes. No, I've got a separate camera sitting on top of the computer and not my laptop screen. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Marita. Thanks very much. We look forward to your presentation.
Yeah, just a little brief intro, and I'll try for my next trick of hopefully sharing a screen. Screen 3. It looks like it's going to work. There goes. Can you see my, just a PowerPoint screen? Is that what you guys can see?
Yes, we can see if you. Yep, that's fine.
Well,
Thank you very much.
good. That's okay. Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar with Zoom. That's my kids' music lessons platform. We use Teams at work, but they're all a little bit similar. Yeah, so I'm Marita. I'm the Regional Weeds Coordinator for Central Tableland, so the whole Central Tableland's local land services area. Started the job probably about, I think it's 3 years ago now. And I guess in summary, what my role is as a way of starting the talk is to support the Regional Weeds Committee, which is the committee that's made up of representation from the 5 local control authorities or councils. So yourselves, Cabonne, Orange, Cowra and Mid-Western Council all sit on that. And then we've also got representatives obviously from local land services, national parks, forestry, Crown Lands, New South Wales Farmers, Water New South Wales and DPI. So I guess we all try to work together to get our best outcomes for weed management across the region. Another big part of my project's just coordinating that the regional New South Wales WAP or the Weeds Action Program funding. So that's the funding that local land services pays out to guys like yourselves annually. And hopefully you've got that in the accounts now, Lisa. And also just sort of, I suppose, monitoring that and getting the reporting and all that side of that, of the Weeds Action Program together as well, working with all the 5 local control authorities for that. And then one of the other, I suppose, big pillars, I suppose, of my work is to monitor the implementation of the Regional Strategic Weed Management Plan.
Or else that in your little baggie.
What's that, sorry?
Sorry, Marita, I was just letting them know that I've given them a little baggie worth of goodies and they've got a copy of that strategic weed management plan
Cool.
in there.
Well, that's good. And then apart from all those, I do a lot of other work, just sort of trying to support community engagement in weeds and producing materials and that for all the councils to use and distribute and support them. Of course, we're all now just, yep, let's see if it's going to work. It's going to move to the next one. There it goes. We're all working with the Biosecurity Act, I guess, and given a short presentation, we haven't got much time to go into all of that, but I'm sure that you're all familiar with that or getting more familiar with it. And as Lisa said, you'll have this copy of this lovely pink Regional Strategic Weed Management Plan, which is our regional plan. There's 11 different plans across the state, depending on what region of local land services that you're in. These plans currently expire at the end of the year. And I'm actually working on a little subcommittee to see if we can get the wording cut down and simplified a bit more in those plans for the next 5-year plan going forward. So the plans identify those our regional priority weed species as well. So what we've worked as a region to say what our priority species are, and also gives some details of the outcomes that the land managers should achieve in relation, or what we'd like them to achieve in relation to each of those priority weed species. And those, if you turn to the back few pages of your plan, that's where you'll see a lot of those regional priority species listed and what those management objectives are for each of those species. So yeah, we will have out for review probably in the second half of this year, out to the Regional Weeds Committee and out to the community for review, the new versions of those plans, with the intention of launching the 2023 to 27 or 8 plan in January or February next year.
Rita, can
Yep.
I ask a question, please?
Yep.
In relation to those weed programs.
Yep.
I remember when the last one was developed, was it 2016, 17, something around there?
Yeah, well, this one was kicked off in 2017, so I guess leading up to that. Yep.
So I know a number of people made representations in relation to issues in relation to that regional strategic weed management
Yep.
plan. And when the representations were made either by email or was requested, I think at the time,
Yep.
that there was never any feedback back as to the status of those representations, as to whether they'd been reviewed, accepted, or if they'd been rejected, the reasons for rejection of, say, certain weeds being included as priority
Yep.
weeds.
Yeah, well,
is that going to be the same this time? Some
oh,
feedback?
hopefully not. Hopefully not. I wasn't around. Obviously, I've only been around for a few years, and it was. I think the implementation of the last plans was really quite hard because the they weren't really coincided with the start of the Act and stuff. So there was a lot of things that weren't quite lining up. So we're hoping we've learnt from where we've got to in the last bit and going forward from that. I did put out last year a call for input into through our LLS channels for input into consideration for other weeds to be included into the plan. So we're actually going through the weed risk assessments of the little bit of feedback we got from that as well now. Yeah, and we're actually working to review all the weed risk assessments, which is the process that we do to say what species are listed and what priority or management objective they're given. So we're going through, that's been a long slog already, going through all the species in the plan there and just making sure that the management objectives that we've got in there are one sort of realistic and achievable, and that we've got agreements across all our 5 local control authorities as well. Being that hopefully that they can all implement at that level of priority. I suppose it's no use having something listed at a level that no one can feasibly implement. But yeah, I don't know what happened with the feedback from the last one, but I'll try.
I've just got one comment, as in
Yep.
with work health and safety. I don't know moving forward whether you want to use a photo with no one with any protective clothing on. Moving forward. But my question revolves around, I think there's 120 something priority weeds for the central tablelands. I stand to be corrected on the number. But the difficulty as a weed authority, we can't put resources into 120 something weeds.
Yeah, so
prioritize. So how are you looking at having the priority weeds?
Yep. So one of the things that's been suggested and that we're toying with, and I guess I'll be talking more with the Regional Weeds Committee as well on this, is that in that list, if you go to the back list in that plan, which is the table, which I guess is that last table, is it Appendix 1.3 or something, which is a collated list of all of them. Yep. It's actually got species of community concern and alert list ones on it as well. And they're actually not the priority species, if that makes sense. And one of the things that a lot of the regions are doing, and we may possibly do, is to take out that community concern list of the plan, so that literally all that we would have for the lists in the plan would then be the state priority species, which we can't change. That comes down from DPI at the state level, and then our regional priority species, which would make it more achievable. And there's a few of our regional priority species that may come off the list. There's a few, in particular, we're looking closely at a couple of the wetland weeds because according to the modelling, they've sort of got no potential of spreading out this way based on climatic and other factors at the moment. And if that's the case, then we really don't need them on our list. And they'll be captured under a new incursion if they do manage to get out here, yeah. So there's ways that we're looking now to try and get that list down so that it doesn't look quite as big, I suppose, and to try and review it and make sure it's manageable.
So Marita, following on from Member Reynolds' question, I have a question.
Yep.
So obviously the essence of the Biosecurity Act is that it poses a risk to obviously properties. Now, one of the concepts is that if a weed has become endemic in an area, then it's arguable that if everyone's got it, then doesn't form a biosecurity risk to neighbours, etc.
Yep.
But if a weed moves into an area, although it may, you can have different priorities in different regions of the area because it hasn't moved in and therefore is not endemic to an area, and you're trying to keep it out, you may want to, in that area, classify it as a priority weed, but you know, with the Upper Macquarie, it may be that for a third of the area it's become endemic, but for the rest it hasn't.
Yep.
If you want to classify it as priority weed so it doesn't become infested in the rest of the area.
Yeah.
How does the regional strategic weed management plan cope with that?
They under the regional section, you've got a whole list of species that are listed as asset protection. So we identify what the asset is that we want to protect. So for instance, St John's Wort, I think at the moment, is listed as an asset protection, and the asset being that we want to keep lands that are free of St John's Wort to continue to be free of St John's Wort. If that makes sense. So that's recognising that there's some areas where it's going to be hard to eliminate it, but we want to stop those areas encroaching on areas which are free of St John's Wort. So that's how, I suppose, on a really local scale, we work to get that or to work with that balance between not having much of the weed and having it quite ingrained or quite widespread. And the other way is if you look up into the higher ones, where we've got, I'm just checking what the wording is in the back of my plan, where you've got a containment objective as opposed to the asset protection one. For a lot of those species, we have identified in the plan an area where we don't want the weed and an area where we understand that the weed is quite widespread and unfeasible to ask for eradication or that heavy control. So yeah, at different scales, I suppose that is the containment objective looks at where we can identify regions or sections of our region where we can feasibly look at eliminating the whole or eradicating that weed, but understanding that there's some areas where we're going to have to just be trying to manage it rather than going for eradication or something like that. Does that help explain a bit?
Well, it does, but I think that then makes compliance and enforcement a bit harder if you have to proceed to prosecution, because it may not be declared a priority weed because it's endemic to part of the area.
It's still a priority weed if it's listed as that asset protection.
Right.
And you can also identify, and I suppose under general biosecurity duty, which I suppose these all sort of fall under, they're working out what you have to do to discharge that your general biosecurity duty. You can get other species that are not listed, but that's obviously the one where it's harder to go. But yeah, I think it's a well, to me it's a good balance where we're not looking at putting up a lot of species onto that asset protection because we want to still keep the species that we've got in there as the priority ones that we want to deal with. I know Chris might be, is Chris there? I think he is up the back. Is he? Yeah, he might be one that you can talk to more about how that happens on the ground as well. But technically, anything can be under the
workshop. Yeah, we do that in the workshop.
but that's almost a whole thing, understanding how some of these how some of this stuff's implemented in the field, and takes a while to get your head around it. Even me, I'm still getting my head around it. But yeah, basically our priority weeds, we will have a few changes possibly coming up and down off that list, but no big major changes, I don't think. But we'll have, that'll be part of the stuff that'll go out for comment. I did just obviously the local control authorities. In your case, it's you guys as a county council. All the other 4 local control authorities in the Central Tablelands region are all council, local government areas. I'm sure you're all totally familiar with or getting more and more familiar with what the local control authorities functions are. And basically it is that inspection and compliance side of stuff. Myself at LLS doesn't do any of that inspection or compliance. I have sat the 1 week, or what was it, or 2-week training program on the legal side of it, just so that I understand more fully what the authorised officers or the weed officers are doing or trying to achieve. That was really good. And I guess it's I see my role is to try and support where I can at a region, any of the issues that might be coming up with some of those, as much as I can in a 1-person position. If you want more detail, and I don't know whether Lisa, you had these for your goodies pack, but there's you do? Yeah. So DPI has actually put out a booklet or a handbook for local councils and councillors on the Weeds and the Biosecurity Act. So that's a really good run through of just what the role of the LCAs, what the role of DPI and all of that sort of stuff. Really good summary of all that stuff. So it's a really good go-to point for that. They've also put together and I've stolen a few of the slides from that, a PowerPoint presentation that can be delivered to councillors or local council management. I guess if you want to delve further into that sort of stuff, then I'm happy to work with Lisa and Chris and get DPI and maybe even my manager from LLS into the room that we can go through and talk a little bit further if you need or feel the need to talk about that Weeds and Biosecurity Act and confirming what your role is and or what everyone's role is in it, because it's quite a confusing space. But I didn't want to go into all that in a short time frame today. I guess what I wanted to, I've got only 2 more slides. One of the things I wanted to really highlight is how I'm working together with Upper Macquarie County Council staff, as well as the other council staff around the region on quite a few different projects. And I've just put a few up here to give you a bit of an idea, I suppose, of what our working relationship is. So on my first day as a regional weeds coordinator way back, one of our pasture officers came into me and said, there's this new weed I want you to do something about, and that's sticky nightshade. So that was on my first day of work. And I'm sure you've all heard of sticky nightshade now, and hopefully seeing the signs that are popping up around your region and stuff like that. So I've worked with the Regional Weeds Committee, which includes or the weed officers and that from each of the council areas, to work on firstly listing sticky nightshade as a priority species in our region. Now it's not in the back of your little pink book because we've listed it since we did the hard copy. But we've got it up, and it's, if you look up on New South Wales Weedwise, either on the app or the website, sticky nightshade's up there now. We were the first region in New South Wales to list sticky nightshade as a priority species. And we listed it primarily based on the fact that it was, although it had been in south of Orange for quite a while, it seemed to be really quite rapidly spreading, and the cost of control and its ability to take over larger areas was a real worry. So that got it up as a priority weed species. And I've been working with everyone making up flyers, signage, and getting a whole regional project together about how we might manage or do a bit of a coordinated project on managing sticky nightshade, which is working really well, I think.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Chair, on sticky nightshade? Given that there is nothing on label as far as I'm aware still, are we moving to, and the temporary registration is coming to an end, are we moving to try and get something on label?
I'm working with DPI at the moment, or hassling DPI to get that temporary permit extended so that we can keep using that. It's harder to get something on label. We have got a research proposal in for a whole project on sticky nightshade, which includes looking at different chemicals, biocontrols, and a whole range of things to make a real holistic project. But we need to try and source funding for that, and substantial funding for that. So we can't do that straight off, but it's certainly, it is there, and I have been hassling DPI for the last 6 months about extending that permit, which is the permit, I believe, for all of the introduced solanum nightshades as well. So we'll need that for some of the others as well. So yeah, trying to work on that. Well and truly aware that that permit's about to go. So hopefully, and I've said to DPI, we really need something. I don't want to go into spring next year with nothing permitted for it.
So following on from that, I was going to ask the same question as Member Reynolds. What's the issue about getting a permanent label? Is it the money? And who ends up forking that out? Is it DPILS or is it the chemical companies?
I'm not sure who forks out the money for that or what the process is. I think different people can put it forward, and I haven't fully worked out the process for that at all. So at the moment, I was advised that extending the permit was probably the best option, because because what's recommended on permit at the moment is working, if it's used properly. Yeah, I'm not quite sure about the next step for that, or who can raise that to put it on permit, whether that goes back
to.
So
are you going to investigate that? How are we going to put that permanently on label? Because that's going to be, because this weed's not going to go away, so we're going to need it permanently on label sooner or later.
Yeah and no, amongst the list of all the other stuff that I'm doing, I suppose, is the thing. But we can certainly put it down as something that that we can look into, or ask DPI what the process is for that, if you like. I'll just writing a note. The other thing I've been working with, in particular, Chris and some of the other weed officers with at the moment, is the herbicide resistance that's been tested for now in the Upper Macquarie area, and worked with Chris and Lisa with their recent media stuff, and have developed some supporting flyers and that for that as well. So yeah, we'll continue on that project. I've got some money aside this year that we can use for testing further samples for further resistance, if we like, as well.
That only applies to serrated tussock. There hasn't been any Chilean needlegrass resistance yet?
No, but Claire Edwards, who's our pasture officer for your side of our region, that eastern side, has collected some Chilean needlegrass off just roadsides, off public areas, just recently. So we'll be sending away 5 samples of that to see whether we've got it. That's sort of a really broad screen as to whether we've got resistance in that, and not necessarily expecting to find it. Unlike the serrated tussock resistance, the samples that we tested for there, Chris and the other weed officers were pretty sure that there was resistance there, just from monitoring the behaviour or its response to herbicide. So we're not necessarily expecting to see something from the Chilean needlegrass, and I guess it's something that if we've got any of us, whether that's you guys or us at LLS, have got money aside, or we collect it from areas that we think may have resistance, then I think it's probably worth putting through and doing that as well now.
Chair, may I ask a quick question on serrated tussock then with propionate and the availability or lack thereof, and we've got this resistance. Is there any work being done, or are we looking at trying at a regional level to try and come up with another alternative chemical that might be able to be used for it?
I don't know, Chris is probably better in a place to speak from this. I guess flupropionate's one of the best ones. Might be good to have a forced break of flupropionate for a year from a resistance point of view, and getting people looking at other management. I think with serrated tussock, we've really got to look to how we can integrate management with a lot of other things, not just chemical. So, you know, whether we do, you know, when you do a flupropionate spray up, you know, can we follow up with Roundup? You know, if you've got small isolated plants, you could go straight to Roundup. How can we introduce better grazing or better ground cover management to try and help that as well? I think we've got to throw everything that we can at serrated tussock. I know they're researching down in Victoria for a biocontrol for that. So they've got like a, I think it's like a rot that goes in and rots out the crown of the plant, a bacterial infection type thing. So, and I guess there's a whole lot of people trying to find a magic answer for serrated tussock. I don't think it'll come off the list of being under those things. I guess we're restricted for chemicals because there hasn't been many new chemicals developed or herbicides developed. So pretty much anything that is available has been tested on things like serrated tussock that's been around for a while. Yeah, I don't know how we go forward with trying to encourage, I suppose, that research into new herbicide development and stuff. I think that's way beyond a regional role.
Mr. Chairman, one other quick thing that is with regard to us prosecuting or proceeding with a landholder who's got serrated tussock, it's going to potentially lead to major challenges for this organisation.
Oh, I know. I think we're going to raise that later in the week thing. Okay, thanks, Brenda. If you could keep going, because we do have a couple of minutes left for 4:30 for the meeting.
Yep, no, that's cool. So I've talked about before that we're going through all those weed risk assessment reviews. So every priority species from at the regional level in the back of the plan is being reassessed, and a couple new ones assessed, and to see whether they can come up into the plan. Obviously, we're working with Chris and Lisa for slowly at the moment developing or rolling out your process for dealing with public lands across the regional to support some of the other councils in that. Yeah, I guess just sharing a lot of knowledge across the region at our regional weeds committee meetings and that. I think it's really important that we've got quite a nice community of practice establishing there now, and happy to support Upper Macquarie guys in things like field days, workshops, or conferences and that, which you guys might not necessarily do on your own. It's more of the forte, I suppose, that some of that public engagement stuff of LLS. So it's really important that we engage and do that together. Lisa asked me to ask or to give a bit of a summary about how you guys are going, I suppose. And I tried to figure out what I would say about this, but I picked out a few points, which I think is important. So DPI did a few audits of LCAs to trial their auditing program and that, and you guys got gold stars, and that was sort of stated out in some of our regional and our statewide meetings and stuff. So that's really cool. There wasn't too many gold stars. There's lots that are working to achieve stuff and that, but you guys got a individual mention on some of those. So I think that's really good, and just shows the space of where you guys have come to over the last years of change and stuff. I just really want to emphasise that Chris and Lisa and obviously some of the other weed officers, it's great how much you contribute actively to weed management in the region. I think that's really, really positive. They've been fantastic at mentoring or helping out other councils that are not quite as well established or trying to find their way a bit more. And then I was just thinking, I sort of had a look here. This is the graph I've put up here is just purely from BIS data. So the data that's reported into the DPI's system, nowhere near as fancy as Chris's reporting, but these are basically just the blue lines are the number of inspections that have been undertaken, and this is for the life of the plan. So starting in that financial year 2018 when the plan was released, mid 2017 to 2018, and then to our last year, our current year now, which is only 6 months through, which I presume if you extrapolate out the columns at the end will double. But I think it's really great just to see the increased capacity and probably sitting around that 2,000 odd inspections undertaken a year. I think that's a huge achievement, down from where you were under 1,000 at the beginning of the plan, and then now seeing your increased. These are the orange bars of directions issued, and that increase in directions issued and compliance as a reflection of compliance, I think, is fantastic as well. And that doesn't show all the, I suppose, voluntary compliance or working relationships that you have with all the people on ground as well. As I said, I knew I didn't have long, so I didn't go into many of the stats, and I'm sure Chris and Lisa are much better at presenting all the work that they do on those. But starting to see those trends, I think it's really heartening that we're really starting to see processes working well. And that's all I've got.
All right, thanks very much, Marita. Are there any other questions?
A question of notice for Marita to come back to Lisa. The $44,000 for the book that we've been holding for a couple of years, could we sort of get an idea of when you might want the money back off us?
It'll pay directly out to the publishers or that. What I'm doing, I'm going to move on that soon, but I want to it's got to match the new the list of species, so it'll match the list of new species going forward in the plan after we've done our revisions. So yeah, it is on the top of my, or second top of my to-do list after all those weed risk assessments.
Okay, any other questions, Marita?
Very quick question, Jim.
Member Watts, you probably know from your own organisation, Marita.
Yep.
Hi Marita, how are you?
Good.
I've just noticed an erect bright purple weed, particularly around O'Connell and Overend. Is it status? I'm wondering, it seems to be increasing beside the roads. I'm wondering if that's regarded as a weed.
Is that purple top or something, do you think, Chris?
It might be purple top, yes.
Purple top has responded really well post-drought, post-fire in a lot of areas. It's come up. So that it's not considered a priority weed. It's just considered a weed being something that's not growing in the right place.
Sure, like mustard or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thanks very much, Marita.
No worries.
Great presentation.
Yep, good to see you all. And hope we have more communications over time.
Thank you.
Now, stop sharing. And slideshow, I'm trying to find Zoom. No.
Stop share.
Yeah.
Stop share.
Stop. Yep, found it.
There we
Cool.
go.
All right. See you guys.
Thanks
Thanks for
very
listening.
Now we have a presentation from the Acting General Manager.
See you again. Hi, everybody. Okay. I'm aware that we're sort of got a bit of time restriction now. I know that some of you may need to get going soon, so I'll try and keep this short. My plan was to just give you a brief overview about specifically who we are and what we actually consist of. That there is a map of our area, all 4 of your councils that form Upper Macquarie County Council. You see the orange line that extends over there towards the east, comes back around here towards Blaney, up around Hill End. 1.5 million hectares, thereabouts. We have in it the 4 LGAs. We've got 5 full-time weeds biosecurity officers. We sometimes refer to them as inspectors. You might hear us call them just inspectors. We have 1 part-time program assistant. He helps across all 4 programs. We have 1 chief weeds officer, Chris Jackson. Biosecurity operations manager is also what he's known as. And then there's me. So we have just as many staff as we do councillors. These are our 4 main programs that you'll hear us discuss. The landholder support program, so that can include aerial spraying, ground spraying, and over-the-counter sales. So this is where we can do most good to help landholders achieve their weed treatment goals. We have our roadside weed control program, so that's where we've developed that memorandum of understanding between us and the constituent councils. We have our weed biosecurity compliance program, so that's where our inspectors conduct inspections on properties and then determine their risk. And I'm going to launch into a little bit more about that after. Then we have our business management program. So that's governance, reporting, audits, issuing of statutory certificates, those sorts of things. That's us. Pretty simple. So going further on that compliance and enforcement, I've picked this particular topic or this particular program to talk most about now, because we're going to make some decisions a little bit later that relate to this. How do our inspectors determine a weed risk? We have 4, 1 through to 4, 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest. What's taken into account when they visit the property is its total size, the portion of the property with any weed invasion, the number of regional priority weed species on the property, as you just heard, and you can see in your books what they are. The average density of weed invasion, so how thick they are together. Good example is this picture here. Pretty good. The invasion risk to neighbours. So do you have 1 blackberry in the middle of 6,000 hectares? Or is it sitting right on the neighbour's boundary? Is there any evidence of serious weed mitigation? So can we see the landholder actually making a concerted effort to control their weeds? These are the things that are taken into consideration. There is a tool that we use. It is based on an Excel program with an algorithm behind it that gives weight to each of these areas. So on the first inspection, we can be drawn to a property from a number of different ways. It could be as a result of a complaint. We could have inspected one property, looked over the neighbour's fence and thought, yep, we're going to head in that direction if they have time. Or they could just be merely driving past and think that's an area I want to hit in a couple of weeks' time, and they're drawn back to that area. They are strategic in most of their inspections, but they do crop up in other areas. So they will try and hit the edge of cluster. So, and by cluster, I mean a priority weed that's covering many properties and trying to contain it or push it back against a certain line. So, however it is that they're drawn, this is one example. They conduct their first inspection, they go to that property and they discover it's a low risk straight up. That's where it stops. It ends in our process, doesn't continue through our process. This is the second example. They conduct their first inspection. It's discovered as a high risk inspection. The property is high risk.
That's a 3 or a 4.
It is a 3 or a 4. That's correct. Yes, that's right. And then it goes through our system. Now that could involve talking to landholders, issuing weed control notices, delivering educational material, But the majority of it is talking to the landholder. That is what we really want to do is talk to them. Go through our process, and what we hope to see is it ends as a low risk. That's where we're headed for. The last one is we conduct our first inspection. It's seen as a high risk, and it's still in our system. When I demonstrate the next lot of figures, I'd like you to remember this one particularly. What happens is, if it's still in our system, that property could have been looked at for the first time back in 2019, or it could have been looked at the 31st of December 2021. It's still rolling through our system. It could have had a weed control notice, it could have had a direction, it could have had a fine, and it's still moving through. It hasn't ended as a low risk and hasn't left our system yet. When we look at documentation that's issued, we've got a number of different tools that are used to try and contact the owner and elicit some kind of conversation with them. To begin with, we use a notice. I'm going to go back this way. Here it goes. So back up here, where we think, like to hit that area strategically, it's a good place to be, like to go and do some inspections there. I'm going to send a notice to enter and inspect. We don't have to. It's a bit of a courteous thing to do. We think it's a nice thing to do just to let people know that we're going to be entering their properties and go through that way. Sometimes we can enter via using a drone or car, or we're going to be walking through it. So we let them know that we're coming. Admittedly, that hasn't happened for a little while. Our major focus has been on re-inspections, but it is a tool that we can use to try and get people talking to us. A lot of the time they're telling us, what are you doing on my property? You're saying that you're coming our way. What are you going to be doing? And it sort of starts that conversation with them. The other thing that we do is issue a weed control notice. And this happens on a high risk property after the first inspection. With that weed control notice, we issue weed-wise pamphlets and a contractors list. So they have the information about the weed that they're being told to get rid of. On that weed control notice is a compliance date and told that if they're failing to comply, further things may result. Again, a weed control notice is not prescribed by the Act. It's a courteous thing to do, but it does build knowledge. They have the knowledge that they must do something and that they do have a biosecurity duty. So it tells them about it, it informs them, and they're educated, or more about education. Individual biosecurity directions, they are prescribed by the Act. Again, they have a compliance date and they're told which weed and what to do with it. And there are certain steps that they have to take to actually abide by the individual biosecurity direction. We refer to them sometimes as IBDs, is another one you'll hear us, or you might see it in our literature.
Do we give them time frames?
We do. So there is a compliance date on the IBD, yep, and failure to do any of the work that is in the IBD, that's when a fine can result. And that is the last tool in our arsenal of things that we can use.
Thus far.
Thus far, that's right. So bearing this system in mind, I have a few little figures. These are inspectorial figures from the 1st of July 2018 to the 31st of December 2021. So these figures, 2018 is what we laugh and say, it's from the dawn of time. This is where we've started this process of risk rating. So to start with, 6,036 inspections have been completed. That's re-inspections, first inspections, evidence gathering. From that, 3,729 were first inspections. So you can assume that those were all properties, individual properties. 2,366 were considered low risk on the first inspection. 1,363 were considered high risk on the first inspection and therefore went through our process, and 692 ended as low as risk. So they stopped, they're no longer in our system, which means we currently have 671 still going through the system. So again, this could have been inspected on the 31st of December or could have been inspected back in 2019. It's merely going through its process. An interesting fact is that we can see, so I started out by saying we've got nearly, they're on 1.5 million hectares. We can say that from the low risk, we can say that 289,000 hectares has been determined as low risk. We can start to narrow down where we've been, what's clear, what's not clear.
It's a third, no. 10%.
I did have the stats there, but
289,000 of.
So 300,000 and
that sounds better.
1/5, 20%.
20%.
Now I know this has been a very quick and brief overview, but I know we need to keep moving. We've got a full agenda. We need to press on. If you're interested, there is more information in the compliance and enforcement policy. It's a great read. It is somewhere you can find information, but otherwise I'm happy to talk to you or even hold another little session or a briefing session if we want to speak specifically about this. But when we go into confidential a bit later, I think we'll probably discuss this a little further anyway.
May I also suggest, Mr. Chair, that we might add something in the workshop, March workshop, if you want to add.
Sure.
Yes, I'd agree with that. There have been, I know, some reasonably succinct presentations we've provided politicians, etc., when we're trying to explain what we do, and some of those are quite good. Just with how the risk rating is, and then how you get the consecutive circles. And even a snapshot of how the register works without obviously having some dummy properties in my door.
We can do that too.
But we don't have time at the moment.
No, and that is why I created it to be very brief.
Yeah, well, I think that's great. That gives everyone a quick overview of where we are and how we're going, where we are, how we got to where we are. One of the, if I can just say, one of the issues we had is that in the last term of council, for those who were on last time, we had a position where, yes, inspections were being carried out prior to that, but they weren't being properly recorded to provide an evidentiary trail all the way along that we can ensure enforcement was occurring. So yes, inspections may have been occurring, but we needed to properly record the evidence at each level of that inspection so that we built up a train. And as we get into the confidential, when we're talking about potential prosecutions without that evidentiary trail, we would never succeed at all. And also, even for issuing penalty infringement notices, you need an evidentiary trail or the penalty infringement notices will be thrown out. So it's been capturing the evidence, putting it in a place, having a register indicating, right, this place has been inspected on this date. When's the re-inspection? Yes, there have to be allowances for things such as drought, etc., but you have to have that chain of evidence all the way through.
Any questions?
And that's what Lisa and the previous general manager, David Young, worked on very hard to get the processes and everything in place that supports our inspection regime. Okay. The next part is the pecuniary interest returns. So the recommendation is that council notes the requirement for 2020-21 pecuniary interest returns must be completed by all members and designated staff and submitted to the general manager before 3 months after having become a member. So I take it becoming a member is the date that your council appointed you as a delegate.
Correct.
So for most of that, that will be somewhere around the end of this month or beginning of March. Sorry? All right, thank you. So can I have a mover for that recommendation, please? Okay, thank you. And a seconder? Member Watts, thank you. Any discussion on this point for the mover or seconder? No?
Oh, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say, I believe that it would be the date. So, for example, my council was the 23rd of December, that you're actually appointed by your council.
That's what I just, yeah.
You said end of February or March.
No, that's when it expires.
Well, yes.
Yeah, so I said it's the beginning of the date that your council appoints you, heading forward 3 months. For most of us, that would be the end of February or beginning of March, depending on when you were appointed. So in my case, 30th of December was the meeting appointed Bruce and myself to here as a delegate. So I'm assuming that that means just before the end of March, where 3 months we have to get our achievement interest returns in.
Do it today.
Okay, all in favour of the recommendation? Thank you. Any against? No, all passed. Right. So now we have the meeting schedule, which is item 2.
Chair, I'd like to move with an amendment.
Okay, before the amendment, yes.
Which is to include an extra workshop on the 27th of May. And the reason for the 27th, if I do have a seconder, for debate or discussion.
Is there a seconder for Member Reynolds' amendment? I'm happy to second it for the purpose of discussion. Maybe you need to discuss why we need it. Yes.
Mr. Chair, for a couple of reasons. One, as we've seen today, as we've taken 2 hours for briefing, and there's a lot more discussion and information in the March workshop. Secondly, I've suggested May rather than originally July, for the simple reason that the staff resources are tied up with audit, etc. And we do have a lot of discussion. Our meetings go for an extended period of time, and a lot of that could be put into workshops where we can openly discuss without making any decisions. And most councils, as in I know my council, Blaney, has workshops once a month where we have 3 or 4 hours of workshops time. And I see that there would be an advantageous. However, if it was decided that it wouldn't be advantageous, we could always cancel that workshop in May if there wasn't enough agenda items or issues to discuss. So I've tried to include it in there as an option so that we can potentially have 3 workshops.
So you're suggesting a workshop 4th of March, the 27th of May, and the 16th of September.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
As I said, I've seconded it on the basis for discussion. I'm happy with the proposal. I think I have a view that, especially for the new members, that we need to get up to speed on this fairly quickly. And we're going to have I think we're going to have a fairly full term in dealing with what has been a huge weed explosion in the area, as we all know. We also are in the midst of making representations to government on a biosecurity fund, which I know we'll discuss later. And I think it's important for members to come up to speed quickly, as you've had a brief overview from the acting general manager on the procedures. But I'm thinking that the first workshop will probably, a lot of it will entail bringing everyone up to speed on how the processes and procedures, how we work in the field, so that you know exactly where we are. So I don't have a problem with the concept. I think as Member Reynolds has said, if we decide on the 15th of April meeting that we don't need the workshop, it can be cancelled.
Mr. Chair, may I also add one extra thing too, as well? There has been some discussion on whether we should look at continuing at 2:30 on a Friday afternoon, whether we look at a different day in the week, whether we look at an earlier time, as you know, say, for example, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But given our time constraints today, could I suggest that we leave a possible changing of meetings later in the year or times to the next meeting, and people can have a think about it, members can have a think about it, then someone may come forward with a proposal. But I have had some suggestions about looking at the day in the week and also the time of the meetings.
I understand that, but I think, and that's a matter of opinion, but I know that there are certain people who have jobs here who have enough trouble trying to, they need at least half a day doing their work. So that has to be considered as well.
Prize with the other.
Naturally, yeah.
Well,
Sorry.
so we have to, I think, so we have to determine all these issues now.
Yes, you can still.
So we on?
Yes, we're currently recording.
All right, in relation to recommendation 2, I note that Blaney and Oberon Council already represented. So we need an appointment of a councillor from Bathurst and Lithgow.
The Bathurst is sorted.
Bathurst,
So, Mr. Chair, can I nominate Member Fry and Member Leslie from Lithgow?
okay, is that supported by Lithgow? Everyone?
Yep, yep.
Okay, no other nominations? There are no other nominations. I declare that members Fry and Leslie be the other 2 appointees on that committee. Now, the decision of the term of the contract for the new general manager. We have to do that here, or are we delegating that to the recruitment committee?
I believe that it's delegated to the whole council.
All right, it's delegated. So I think the options are, what is it, 3 or 5 years?
Can't be less than 12 months, can't be longer than 5 years.
Effectively, it's 3 or 5.
So do we have any views as to the length or duration? Noting, is there a probation period of 90 days, 90
The
days?
review will be conducted at 6 months.
6
So
months.
every 6 months, you'll get a review.
Right, but is there a probation
I
period?
don't believe so,
There's no-
unless you alter or amend the contract offered to the proposed new general manager.
My view is there should be a probation period, but that's not on any employment contract. So I would be suggesting that we have a probation period. I think law allows 3 months, but you can extend it to 6 months, can't you, in certain circumstances? So if we look at that, please, at least a probation period of at least 3 months, but preferably 6 months. What's everyone's view on that?
Mr. Chair, may I suggest a 3-year contract?
And a 3-year contract. Yeah, did anyone have an objection to 3 years? Okay, so I think we've got probation period plus 3-year contract.
6-month probation period.
If possible, yes, you have to look at the legislation. Now, the hours per week should be contracted to then match the remuneration accordingly. I would be suggesting that should be delegated to the Recruitment and Performance Review Committee until interviews are undertaken. We understand who the applicants are and what they are. I think it's a bit premature to make that decision now.
I agree, Mr. Chair. We might need to fluctuate that based on the talent presented.
Yeah. So I would suggest we can delegate that, I believe, to the recruitment. And for those not on the Recruitment and Performance Review Committee, are you happy with that? Member Owen, Member O'Connor?
Yep.
And Member White, sorry, I'm just suggesting that it's a bit premature to do it now until we know who the candidates are, what their capacity is, etc. We can't really determine hours and remuneration.
And Mr. Chair, also a suggestion, we will probably have a draft budget that might give us an indication of the finances position.
Now, in relation to the recruitment agency, we have 3 quotes.
We can wait to go into committee of the whole until we can wait to the end of getting through the items and then go into the committee of the whole and address all of the individual items then.
All right. Yes, I think we'll have to.
Which is what number 7 says.
Yes, yes, that's right. So we will do that when we get into the confidential items, sorry. Okay, so I think we have dealt with all the issues that we have to on this stage. So if we go to item 5, statement. Oh, sorry, all in favour of what we proposed?
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 5, statement of investments as of the 31st of January 2022. A recommendation that council notes the statement of investments report as of 31st of January 2022. Pursuant to section 625 (2) of the Act, The Minister issued a revised investment order by way of the New South Wales Government Gazette in February 2011. That order requires the County Council to only invest money in a specific range of investments and in Australian currency. Investments funds are in cash funds held by Council other than those required for operational purposes held in the consolidated account established under clause 204 of the Local Government General Regulation. Can I have a mover for that recommendation, please? Councillor Member Fry, seconder. Member Reynolds. Any discussion on the recommendation? All in favour?
Aye.
Any against? No. Unanimously carried.
Keep going.
Right, item 6, quarterly budget review and statement. Number 2, for the financial year. Purpose of the recommendation is, and I note that there was a new QBRS issued earlier, which has been issued out to all members. Yes.
Can I move with one amendment, Mr. Chair? There is one minor error on income and expenses. Roadside weed control program has a figure of 0 in the second column, September quarter, where it should be $20,000. Take it to $175,440. So it's the only amendment that I'm moving on. What the
That's in the QBRS.
It's in the QBRS, yes.
Okay, can I
Oh, second
that? Right, so the recommendation acknowledges the adjustments made to correct the errors from the first QBRS and notes the changes just proposed by Member Reynolds and seconded by Member Fry. Accepts the nominal figure of $15,000 to engage a recruitment agency to assist in the employment of a general manager. 3, adds an additional $50,000 of unrestricted funds to the roadside weed control program. Have an amendment?
No, Mr. Chair, I was just going to discuss the motion,
Okay.
particularly the roadside weed spraying, which I think needs to be highlighted. My understanding is we've exhausted all roadside weed spraying funding at this point in time. As we heard from the accountant earlier, the auditor, we can make adjustments. We are sitting from a cash point of view at a good position. This extra funding would enable particularly blackberry control across the county councils, the 4 councils. Important, given the widespread growth and the number of comments, feedback about visible weeds, that if we could take some more action now, it may actually be preventative action that we can actually hopefully get a little bit further in front of control of particularly blackberries if we do allocate some more money at this point in time. Hence the suggestion to allocate $50,000 on a pro rata basis per council.
Okay. Can I ask Chief Weeds Control Officer, first of all, we have the worst weed problem we've had in years because of the nature of the season. I, as other members have obviously experienced and had complaints from people about the weeds. If we were to allocate an amount of money to this, we have on our roads. Do we have sufficient chemical and sufficient capacity within our existing contractors or our listed contractors to undertake the work at the moment? I ask that because I know there's one contractor I had a chat to the other day who said he didn't have any more capacity to do work. He was absolutely flat out with private work, etc. So the question is, can we find contractors to actually perform this work?
So we're looking at an extra 50.
Well, it could be 50, it could be more. If we were to clean up the roads, what would it cost?
I can't give an exact dollar figure.
I realise that.
Can I step in?
Yes.
Sorry. My plan is in April, for the April meeting, not on Good Friday, the following week. My plan is to bring another report on roadsides so that we can determine the differences over the past years, and in which we would hope to provide some maps with some overlays about the years that we can see have gone past. So we're going to see probably in maybe the last 3 years, the differences that we've made, and to see how many roads that we've gotten to. So based on that information, I don't think that we can look and say it's going to cost exactly, 500,000 to cover every single road in a year. I think it needs a little bit more than just hitting up the operations manager on the spot and saying how long is, how much is it going to take and how much resources are we going to need. I think if we could just wait until the April meeting, see how we get on. In the meantime, I have put that recommendation there as a result of being requested by a number of members and seeing that extra funding would assist in making it just a little bit further in this roadside spraying program until we can really get a hold of what information we've currently got and having a look at the roadsides in that capacity.
I understand that, but the issue I have at the moment is we still have the opportunity with weeds such as St John's wort before they still haven't dropped their seeds to spray them. If we wait till after April.
No. I'm not saying we're not saying stop roadside spraying today. I'm saying let's continue. Let's consider an extra 50,000 as a nominal figure that we've just drawn, because we've got some unrestricted cash there that we can spend on it, that the constituent councils have given us to spend on whatever our choice may be, and that may benefit this year's roadside spraying program. But I don't think we can determine exactly how much we're going to need to get to the end of every single road in the year until we assess specifically what we've done to date and how long and how much money it has taken. So I think we're not saying stop, we're not going to say wait, we are going to continue with our roadside contractors and get them to keep moving forward. But if we add that little bit of extra funds, we might just get a little bit further with it.
Mr. Chair, just nominating a nominal fee and see how we go with it with no key metric attached to it.
Yeah, so I'm having troubles to work out whether 50,000 is sufficient or not sufficient.
It will never be sufficient.
We realise that.
$50,000 doesn't come close to it. We know it doesn't come close to it, but we don't have a figure yet until we can actually assess how good we've been, particularly in this big growth season that we've seen.
The other trouble we've got,
So
the other trouble we've got too, as everyone knows, not just roadsides, but properties and everything, this year things have relatively exploded. So looking at dollar figures too, like a dollar figure that covered a road X last year, or especially the years that were dry, this year there's 2-3 times the growth on them. So that same amount of road takes more time or more money to spray. So it's hard to give an exact figure, especially in a season like this.
So remind me how much was in our budget for roadsides for
157,000.
157,000. So basically we're doing a third more again of what we've done.
Sorry, plus there's also the carryover of last year, which got us up to about
107. Yeah. So my suggestion would be 80. I think we need to. Certainly.
This came up at our last council meeting. It was the notice of motion, which was concerned about mowing of roadsides. Now, weed spraying doesn't actually reduce the volume of grass, does it? It just kills the weeds. And one of the concerns raised at Lithgow was that with the excessive amount of growth, and then give us 3 or 4 weeks of hot weather, it will become a fire hazard because it'll just go. Now, I think you've got to start thinking about what the constituent councils are doing. Lithgow Council is very concerned about getting the Transport New South Wales to mow the highways, and there's got a major. The notice of motion was deferred for a report from the general manager about the process of mowing, but it's pretty clear that they'll be coming back with some recommendation about how to mow the roadsides right through the Capity Valley in particular, and and other, and probably Harvey Valley. So you might want to think about exactly what your constituent councils are going to be doing before we start getting over concerned about what how we're going to just reduce weeds inside this enormous growth. I mean, the amount of rain we've had and the heat we've had, it's unprecedented, the growth we've had.
I appreciate that, member. Usually the mowing only does the verges, and then the weeds are usually back further, quite often back towards the fences a lot more. So they're not. And we already have some problems with mowing because it can spread things like African grass, as you know, around Lake Lyle in your constituent area.
Well, I suggest somebody talks to our general manager before he actually brings down this report.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, I think this is a pretty reasonable request or suggestion that we do put more money towards the roadside spraying. As we all know, it's been a very unusual period of time with the excessive growth, and the weeds are very prolific. And as we as a council, I believe, need to be leading the way in this. If we're expecting people on the other side of the fence to spray their weeds, if we aren't starting to be leading the way, setting an example and do a bit of leadership in our where we can control on roads, well, it's pretty hard to sort of point the finger too hard at anyone else. $50,000 in this day and age isn't a lot of money towards weed spraying. It's an opportune time now with Blackberry, and well, we're getting pretty late on the end of St John's Ward, and you know, we have to be very selective with the roads that we do spray because of the amount of money we've got available. So we have that money sitting there that is accessible for this. So let's you know, put a hat on and show the way a bit. You know, like should it not all be spent before the end of financial year? So be it. But should it be, and we see it's necessary to do it again if we don't have an allocation large enough, well, you know, let's do it, because, like I say, we're here advocating that we want people to control weeds. So let's lead the way. Simple as that.
I propose an amendment to 80,000. I'm happy if that's not accepted, but I'm just saying I don't know that 50,000 will go far enough. I again refer to the chief weed officer review. With the finances.
I think so. I believe that we have enough unrestricted funds there currently to cover $80,000 worth of extra roadside spraying.
What was the original figure?
50.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, should not all the money be spent? Well, it's neither here nor there. At least if it's there, we've got the opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I elaborate on the acting general manager? It's possible that we will go into deficit, profit and loss wise, in spending 50,000. So we'll probably definitely go in at 80,000 with other costs like recruitment of general manager. But on the other side, we've had some profits for the last few years, including 137,000, I think it was last financial year. So we're using some of the restricted funds we talked to the auditor about previously. So we could go, it's just be aware that it's highly likely that we will go into a negative figure, which we were, I think, sitting at 6% or 7% or something for this financial year, the more we spend on weeds, because it has to be taken into account in the profit and loss. So hopefully that answers your question. But as the mover, I think did I move this or not? I can't remember.
Yes, you did.
Yes, you did.
I'm happy to accept the amendment to go to 80. But if we don't have the capacity, if we can't get weed sprayers, then we don't do 80. If that is, we're not going to throw waste money on the other side is the important thing. I don't know about Member Fry, whether he's
80's fine. Sounds good.
Any other views? Should it amend in particular on the 50 ABI? I'm happy with whatever ends up being the position. You got a view?
No, I've got no problems.
I have a view to put the motion.
All right. I put the motion, which is as stated with a figure of in three of, I think it's 80,000 now instead of 50. All those in favour? Item 7 is the 2021-22 delivery program. Obviously, this is the delivery program that is already in existence. The recommendation is that council notes the 2021-22 delivery program, half-yearly progress report. And we have the half-yearly report. Could I ask for a mover and a seconder? What? Discussion on that by the mover or the seconder? Any discussion by anyone else? I put the recommendation. All those in favour? We go to item 8. Audit Risk and Improvement Committee formation.
Mr. Chair, may I move some amendments? So the council resolved to form an audit risk and improvement committee and endorse panel of independent members appointed by for Central Tableland Water County Council and Blaney Shire Council. Number 2, adopt the audit risk and improvement committee charter. Number 3, the council nominate a representative, member X and alternative member Y, we'd like to make a decision on in a minute, to sit on the council's audit risk and improvement committee. And number 4, create a finance subcommittee consisting of the ARIC representative, person X, and chair, who's the chair, to be the chair, an alternative, person Y, and one other member, being another member of the county council. Don't know if there's a seconder.
Is Travis.
The general practice is to remove finance from audit risk at the moment.
Eventually you will anyway, from the 1st of July, the member won't have a voting right. Is the
Yeah.
And then the chair alternate.
So
So he has kept it within the article, the chair.
I'll second it so we can discuss it.
okay, if we have a second, thank you. I was just trying to get some clarification from the acting general manager on that. So it's a second. So Member Reynolds, you're proposing that we have a separate finance committee as well as this independent audit.
Chair of subcommittee, yes.
Subcommittee.
Of this
Do
council.
we need
This
that?
council.
Because we could have because this whole council could act as a finance committee.
It could, but as in my experience, for example, with the QBRS, or to look at a budget, as in the finance committee just to review before publication, would be potentially advantageous. I'm happy because of time constraints to withdraw that section and just leave it as the dot point that we nominate the representatives. But for assisting with the general manager, and there may be discussion on whether it should be the ARIC representative and the alternate, and another member, or have independent members of that committee. So I think maybe I'd look at withdrawing if the seconder for the time constraints today, and maybe we could look at this as a notice of motion for the next county council meeting.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we put as a notice of motion because I think all of us just need to consider it. Whether, because previously, obviously, as a county council, we have considered acted as basically a finance committee or a subcommittee. So this would be a new concept, which I don't think any of us are necessarily against, but we just need to consider it.
So I'm happy to withdraw, just
Okay,
and
withdraw
stop
that
that
one.
the 2 people for the nominate.
Anyone speaking in favour or against the proposed recommendation as amended? Proposed and seconded, so I'll put the recommendation. All in favour?
Aye.
You're right with the wording.
Yep.
Right, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. Item 19.
Mr. Chair, we have to make a decision then on the nominees.
On the nominees.
As the member. Mr. Chair,
Okay.
I'm happy to nominate because the chair can't participate because I'm the alternate on the Blaney Council one, and we would meet on the same day as the Blaney and Upper and Central Tablelands. So now I'm happy to put my name up. Others may also wish to push that.
Okay, we have the deputy chairman's nominated. Any other people putting their hand up to be on the audit
We do
committee?
need an alternative, but we'll put the delegate to start, Mr. Chair.
You're the delegate, we need an alternate.
Yes, yes. If I'm the delegate.
Yes. So do we need an alternate? So who, anyone want to propose to be the alternate?
Very long way to Blaney.
You can attend
What,
both.
when are these meetings usually held, Bruce?
They're held quarterly, I think it is.
Where? What time? What time?
I think they're in the morning. If I've only just been appointed.
Ours would be held in the afternoon, yeah, so I believe that, I think it's Blaney, then Central Tablelands Water, and then ours will be held in the afternoon, is how we propose to go.
Right.
Sorry, I've got 50 committees.
Alan?
No, thank you.
Can
All
I
right,
say-
so
I'm happy to
I'll
support the
put
deputy
myself on
mayor,
as
and I
an
think that you as the chairman could be the
Right.
I don't think you can sit on
You
there.
can't be.
I can't sit on it, I don't
No, I think member Leslie was sort of, warming to it.
Particularly if it's via Zoom, Mr. Chair, as in member
Well,
Leslie
member O'Connor?
might be willing to.
Stephen is the man that I nominated.
Put his hand, we've got a hand. Alternate.
And please remember, Mr. Chair. it's
I'm only an
only-
alternate.
I think I was-
I'm not
Only if
I'm not
I'm-
expected to have to go.
Only if I'm unavailable, Mr. Chair, would member Leslie have to attend unless he really wants to. He can attend.
You're entitled to attend anyway. It's
Thank
always
you.
good to have two there.
Thank you. I'll keep that.
All
in mind.
right, so I think we have a nomination for member Leslie as the alternate.
Perfect.
So can I, so do we have I suppose we have to have we have to have a recommendation. The recommendation is that the deputy chairman, member Reynolds, be the representative on audit risk and improvement committee, and the alternate representative be member Leslie.
Sounds good.
All right, all in favour?
All right.
Oh, you move in second.
I'll move it.
All right, second.
Yes, thank you.
I thought I'm allowed to. It doesn't matter. Yeah, all right, we have a second, and a mover, so all in favour?
Aye.
Yep.
Right, passed.
Mr. Chair, I've got a hard stop at 5:15, just FYI.
I'm sorry, yeah,
Sorry,
member wants to tell me he had to go because he's got a look at sheet with Barbara's poll.
mate,
All right,
bye, everybody. Thank you.
right, so item 19 is delegates to the local government New South Wales special conference. The recommendation is council nominates one member as the voting delegate for council at the LG New South Wales special conference held from 28th of February to the 2nd of March 2022. We have a mover?
Yeah.
And a seconder? Member Owen. Now, just before we do the nominations, is anyone going to the local government conference in any form? Anyone?
I'm going as a delegate from the council.
I'm going as delegate of Bathurst.
Right,
But
Can I
you can't
nominate
get 2 votes,
member Reynolds
okay.
as far as I'm aware.
in
We-
the interest of
We
time?
do get do we get 2 votes?
No, we
I only get one, I thought.
one.
All right.
No, but one individual, for example, wouldn't get 2
How's
votes.
your hand
Upper
going?
Macquarie
Sorry?
has
How's
one.
your voting hand?
If I get a vote,
Strong?
strong.
Before I recommend
I
you.
couldn't go and say like
Can I sit near you?
that. Or vote there, vote no.
Yeah.
work really well.
So can we amend the recommendation to have the second one as the appointment of the person?
Oh, I took that, sorry, I must have.
That's all right. So we have the recommendation is council nominates. We've had that proposed and seconded. Can I have a mover and a seconder for council Reynolds to be as a second point under the recommendation as the Upper Macquarie's delegate to the local government New South Wales conference? Are you? I think member Fry opposed that.
Wouldn't you just change that recommendation?
All right, we can amend the recommendation to say council nominates
Member Reynolds.
Member Reynolds.
Yep.
The proposer and seconder agree to that amendment?
Member Fry, Member Yuan.
Mhm.
Yep.
That was agreed. All right. I put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye.
Mr. Chair, just a matter arising from it, former member Kingham is actually going to be acknowledged at the conference at the dinner. So with the council's indulgence, hopefully the council's happy to also fund the dinner, a ticket for the dinner to attend to acknowledge member Kingham from the previous two county councils.
Yes, as he's been a member, I think we are all in favour of that.
Yes.
Item 10 is the general update. Council notes the general update on topics: roadside spraying, aerial spraying, roadside signs, resistance in serrated tussock, diminishing supply of fluoropropionate, remote censoring using satellite imagery, presentation to the State Weed Committee regarding a prosecution fund. I'm not going to read out everything below that, but that is the recommendation on all the issues raised in this item. Can I have a mover, please? Fry, Member Fry, Member Reynolds. Matters arising out of this paper, general update. Yes, Member Reynolds.
Just a quick update from the Chief Biosecurity Officer. How are we going with roadside spraying, given that some of the councils there had very little at the time of the report? Are we nearly finished?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah, a large number of extra roads have now been completed on top of that since this report went out. So all 4 council areas have active weed control underway, and as you can see, we've also done a number of roads as part of the agreement we've got with forestry as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I ask maybe, so have we exhausted the funds on any of the roads at this stage, any council areas apart from, I think you said one of them has been exhausted? Blaney's exhausted. The others have not, they've still got funds to spare. Okay, could you give us an update, please, on the aerial program? You said it was coming along slower than usual. Have we got any update on that either?
I do.
Oh, sorry, acting general manager.
Thank you. So I have checked in with our program assistant, and to date we have 4 serrated tussock booked in, agreements signed, and deposit statements released to 19 landholders. And that covers an area of 780 hectares, and there's more to come. For blackberry, we have 11 landowners booked in, which is only covering 177 hectares, but I know that there is a lot more to come in the next week or so with arranging their aerial agreements and getting their mapping sorted. So yeah, it has been quite an effort. Pushing through COVID restrictions has been our hardest in meeting landholders face to face. That was our first thing to overcome. And yes, we tried to do a lot of things remotely using technology. However, that has failed and let us down occasionally there. So that's also held things up, trying to find a solution to that problem. But even our expert IT staff are, without spending an exorbitant amount of money on extra mapping to cover this area, it's probably the best one that we've got. It's potentially the units that we're using. So we may be looking at changing to different units, not just because of this. We're noticing a lot of problems with our current devices that are out in the field, causing all sorts of headaches for us. So those are the 2 main issues that we've faced, particularly in blackberry. Also with our with COVID and even the close contact rules preventing staff from leaving home, that has also stopped the preparations for aerial spraying or delayed it.
So we have sufficient fluoropropionate for those 19 landholders.
We actually set aside out of our last delivery of task force is the brand we use. We set aside a certain amount for aerial spraying. I believe it's about 120 drums worth, which equates to about 1,200 hectares worth. So that's what we're looking to fulfill out of those 120 drums. Don't quote me on that. It's about that.
Yeah. So the Blackberry program, we think that'll end up being what, 1,000 hectares?
That is very, very difficult to say at this stage. Very difficult.
I'm surprised because it's pretty low.
Yep, so are we.
Okay, so we got it, so we've got it out there, obviously, with people who have got directions and notices against them. Is it being publicly advertised that we're running?
We have offered that. We can't force those landholders into taking that option, but we have certainly mentioned that to them and said that this is an option for them, that this may assist them to reach their IBD direction obligations.
So have we also had it advertised?
We did. We have also, so I set up a list in which we were able to do bulk SMSing. So we've done that for the first time from previous landholders that have engaged our services for aerial treatment. So bulk SMSs went out and bulk emailing has also went out. It also went to all 4 of our constituent councils. They posted it on their websites, Facebook sites, or social media, I should say. And I believe, yeah, I think that's about it, what that we did for.
So Acting General Manager, could you read out the resolution emanating from item 4A confidential, please?
Yes. Council will engage Blackadder and Associates to assist in the recruitment of Council's new General Manager. Do you want me to continue through the items?
Yes, item 11.
Item 11. Council will agree to continue the process to prosecute landholders in the Upper Macquarie County Council who breached the New South Wales Biosecurity Act 2015. 2, to review biosecurity investigations conducted by council staff that have escalated to prosecution and forced control work. 3, provide to council legal counsel property to be reviewed for prosecution and a recommendation provided to UMCC. Delegate to the chair and deputy authority to authorise legal counsel to proceed.
Deputy Chair.
Deputy Chair, all right. All right, I don't know where that came from. To authorise legal counsel to proceed with prosecution based on legal counsel's advice. Following, where are we up to? 5, following approval by the chair and deputy, council's legal counsel prosecuted 1 or more landholders at local court and control work to be carried out. Authorise the expenditure from the budget of 25,000 already set aside on the prosecution and control work. Authorise the chair to make a media statement reviewed by legal counsel once prosecutions have commenced. Chair and council continue to seek the establishment of a biosecurity prosecution fund.
Right, and item 12.
Council notes the report.
Thank you.
Close.
You can declare the meeting.
Declare the meeting. Oh, we have to go into the next meeting. So we have to declare the next meeting. The next meeting.
No, we did that in June.
Oh, we did that.
One of the items.
Meeting schedule. We don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I declare the meeting closed at 5 to 6:54. Is it 5:56? 5:56.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Go now, Al.